As the future of the New Orleans Saints for this season and beyond hangs in the balance, it could all come down to the defense to keep things going. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day, and a big shout out to all you everydayers out there. Don't forget that you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to keep the conversation going, take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, and much more, you can become a Locked On Saints insider today by simply texting Who Dat to 504-285-7473 to join a community I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the Media Saints News Network, Tuesdays in the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints, as well as all of our crossover Thursday episodes for all of the teams that are playing this week, are brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and enter the promo code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be taking a look mostly at the New Orleans Saints defense, where they can improve, how the offense still has to be able to show up. But I want to start this conversation off with whether or not the New Orleans Saints defense can keep the season alive for the New Orleans Saints. And here's the bottom line. I do believe that the defense has everything that it takes to keep the New Orleans Saints alive, and it all starts with the passing game. And look, they're going to need help. It can't just be all about the defense, but we broke down the offense yesterday, focusing on the defense today. We are going to jump back into the offense just a little bit, but I want to highlight why the New Orleans Saints defense will at least give this organization and this team a fighting chance in just about any game left on the rest of the schedule, as long as they can fix the slow start problems that they've had. If you look at how the New Orleans Saints have fared against the passing game, they're still near the top of the NFL when it comes to this conversation. Now, they're ninth in the NFL when it comes to passing yards allowed, but there's bigger and more important numbers than just the raw statistic of how many passing yards have been allowed. We're going to take a look at all those. The thing that I will highlight here is that when we're talking about keeping the opposing passing game limited, the reason why that becomes so important is because in today's NFL, that's how you put points on the board. The phrasing usually is that you pass to score points, and then you run to win the game. So you look at a game last week against the Minnesota Vikings, it wasn't Alexander Mattison and Ty Chandler that gave the New Orleans Saints issues in the run game, eliminating and we're taking the quarterback run situation out of the game, out of the conversation. But instead, really in the first half, it was TJ Hawkinson having 120 whatever receiving yards in the first half on 10 catches, even though he was hurt. It was the fact that Joshua Dobbs, let alone being able to run, but just being able to extend plays from the backfield, was able to find ways to find receivers downfield and give the New Orleans Saints some headaches in those situations. And so I look at those things as the Minnesota Vikings' ability of being able to put points on the board early on with their passing game as really being what kind of did the New Orleans Saints in by the time that it was all said and done. So here's a couple of pieces, a couple of numbers, some statistics for you to know as you go into, as we dive further into this conversation. The New Orleans Saints right now have seen the second most turnover-worthy throws in the NFL. This is a part of the bad quarterback schedule, right? And they've taken advantage of that. 12 interceptions so far on the season, tied for the second most turnovers in the league right now. They've taken advantage of those opportunities. They also have allowed and forced the third lowest passer rating and third lowest completion percentage against in the NFL so far as well. So quarterbacks are underperforming when going up against the New Orleans Saints offense. When it comes to the passing game, again, I'm trying to leave the quarterback scrambling conversation out for right now. We're going to get to that here in a little bit. But also, the receivers are underperforming. And one of the reasons why they're underperforming is because the Saints are forcing one of the league's lowest, actually the league's lowest, contested catch percentage in the NFL. So when there's a player in position to make a play, they tend to make that play. Now, obviously, there are going to be some exceptions to that, right? You think of Tyrann Mathieu, 5'9", matched up in a mismatch with Cole Kmet, 6'6". Yeah, contested catch opportunity, forcing one is a win there, but you might not necessarily win what you have forced. So there's always going to be examples otherwise. However, the Saints have lesser or a lower number of examples otherwise than any other team around the NFL when it comes to this conversation. So you can see how they're impacting the ball at the catch point. One really, really good way to look at this is understanding completion percentage over expected. So going into every season, going into every game, there's effectively a market expectation placed on how much a team will produce against a selected defense, right? Against the defense that they're going up against. You can look at yards over expected. You can look at completion percentage over expected. You can look at completions over expected. And so what you're doing is that you're setting a market expectation or a projection, kind of like how we talk about prize picks. You set a projection, and then either those defenses force a lower than expected completion percentage, or they allow a higher than expected completion percentage. And so you could take that and kind of reverse engineer it and look at that completion percentage in terms of what the entire defense for that season is expected to allow. The New Orleans Saints have completely overperformed the expectations on completion percentage, allowed the best in the NFL when it comes to completion percentage over expected, because they're coming in well under that projected expectation. So you can see that the New Orleans Saints are fantastic as a defense consistently, right? Not always 100%, but consistently enough that it allows the team to be in games. And that's the biggest thing. Even these past few games where the Saints defense failed early, right? 2 touchdowns in the first 3 possessions against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Chicago Bears. Kind of the back and forth fight between them and the Indianapolis Colts. Early scores allowed against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Saints tied that game up because the defense gave them opportunities to do that. The Saints won their game against the Indianapolis Colts because the defense clamped down late. The Saints were able to turn things around against the Chicago Bears because they had only allowed 3 points as a defense after those first 2 touchdowns in the early 2 drives. And even against the Minnesota Vikings, 3 points allowed in the second half. So when you look at where the Saints have been able to clamp down on defense in the passing game, it has vastly allowed the New Orleans Saints offense to get opportunities to get back into games. And in some cases, they've been able to do that. In other cases, they have not. Let me look at a couple of other quick things real quick with you. Versus the run, the Saints are fantastic against the zone run. 7th best team against zone runs, which is important because they're going up against some zone run heavy teams in the back half. So zone run meaning that the offensive linemen are more concerned with blocking gaps than they are about blocking the person in front of them and trying to open up multiple holes for the running backs to be able to choose from. The Falcons love this. That's the New Orleans Saints' next opponent. The Saints also have the 3rd lowest percentage of targets on design plays. So screens out of the backfield, bubble screens, tunnel screens, all those things, forcing teams to move away from those. And then the 2nd lowest missed tackle percentage as well. So making tackles at the catch point in the passing game. They struggle with missed tackles in the run game. We know this. But missed tackle percentage in the passing game, they're making tackles at the catch point. Now, obviously, again, exceptions otherwise will exist. Christian Kirk, for instance. But again, the Saints will have the 2nd least amount of those examples out of anybody in the NFL. So what you're seeing the Saints do really well is take away passing games and turn the ball over, force those turnovers, take away the football. And that will not matter at all unless one thing happens. I'll tell you what it is as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at DoorDash. DoorDash is an absolute lifesaver for me. Y'all know I stay busy with the research and cutting together the shows and building up all the articles and all these other things. It can be, a busy time, and sometimes I don't feel like cooking, all right? And that's why DoorDash is so helpful for me, because I just pick up my phone. I've already got the app. I grab a spot like Thousand Figs or some local spot that I really love here in New Orleans. Thousand Figs is one of my tops. Go ahead and order from them. Shows up boom, I'm ready to go, eating, and I'm continuing to grind. So go and check them out today. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order with the DoorDash app. Download it and enter that promo code LOCKED23, LOCKED23, subject to change, terms apply. That's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first purchase. Just download that DoorDash app, promo code LOCKED23, subject to change, terms apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints defense can force all the turnovers it wants, but none of that's going to matter unless one thing happens. We're breaking that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate all you everydayers for being here and for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Hey, I want to tell you about some pretty cool news that we have here at Locked On real quick, if you'll entertain me. We actually just launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's really, really freaking exciting. So I really hope that you take the time to go and check it out. 24/7 covering 24/7 covering all of the top stories around professional sports with all the local experts and all of our national shows as well, giving you all the information for every team in every league. Go and check out Locked On Sports today on YouTube and subscribe for the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. How cool is that? All right, so as we're taking a look at what the New Orleans Saints need to be able to get done over on the defensive side, some of this still comes back to the offense. So we're just about turnovers. And listen, turnovers can help. Takeaways, all that stuff, it can absolutely help put teams in position to be able to close gaps, to extend leads, to get leads, to score points, and all that. But none of it matters if the offense can't get it together and if the offense can't score when they get those turnovers. The New Orleans Saints so far through their 10 games have 18 turnovers on the season, okay? 12 of those being interceptions, 6 of those being fumble recoveries. And the Saints on 18 turnovers have scored just 44 points. That includes extra points, right? That also includes opportunities in terms or that does not include rather the turnovers on downs, right? We're just looking at interceptions and fumbles. That's all the NFL counts as turnovers. So when we look at points off of turnovers, those are the things that we're looking at. So 44 points off of 18 turnovers forced so far this season. That means that they are averaging just 2.44 points per turnover. That is less than a field goal per turnover. That is not good. That is not good. So you look at games like the Tennessee Titans win, right? 10 points off of 3 turnovers. All 3 of those were interceptions. New England, there were 17 points off of 3 turnovers. Keep in mind, though, that one of those was a pick 6. So if we take those 7 points off and we take that takeaway away, Tyrann Mathieu, shout out, and we just look at what the offense did, that means that's 37 points off of 17 turnovers. So that drops that to just 2.1 points per turnover. These are not good numbers. The Saints also had 10 points off of 5 turnovers against Chicago. They had 7 points off of 1 turnover against Indianapolis. That's the best ratio that they've had so far on the season. And then they had no turnovers last week against the Minnesota Vikings, the first game this season in which they did not force a turnover. So this is a big, big issue. The Saints' inability to turn around and put points on the board off of the extra chances that defenses are giving them. This includes like the muffed punt against Jacksonville, right? That's a fumble recovery. The interceptions by Paulson Adebo against the Chicago Bears. The interception by Marshon Lattimore earlier on in the season. Like all of these things are included in this conversation. And the one and only game in which I would caveat a little bit is that the Saints offense never got a chance against Houston to capitalize on the 1 turnover that they forced because that was the Zach Bond interception, and then he fumbled it during the return. Here's the other thing that's wild. And what I want to mention too is I shared this number early with the Locked On Saints insiders before I started recording. And I want to give a shout out to Chris, one of our insiders, who said this quote: "Can't be robbing the bank just to sit in the parking lot." Is there a better way to look at this than that? The New Orleans Saints defense going out there robbing the bank. The New Orleans Saints offense, the getaway drivers, chilling, asleep at the wheel. That can't happen. The other thing that I want to point out here is wins versus losses, okay? If we just look at the wins for the New Orleans Saints, they're averaging 3.4 points off of turnovers, right? 3.4 points per turnover. That's Much better. You kind of want to be creeping closer to 4 points is kind of where you want to be as an NFL team. Trust me, I'm going to go through every single NFL team today, go through and figure out what the average is across the NFL and where the New Orleans Saints rank beyond that. And if the Locked On Saints insiders will get that info. But you want to be closer to 4 because if you think about it, if you're on an offense that's getting takeaways, right? Or if you're on an offense that's benefiting from a defense that's getting takeaways for you, and you score in equal halves, touchdowns and field goals, 5 points, right? 5 points is your average. You got 8 takeaways, 4 touchdowns, 4 field goals, 40 points. That's 5 points per turnover. You have to imagine that you're going to miss out on a couple of those every now and then, right? You're not going to score on every single possession that you gain from a turnover. So you're creeping closer to 4 points per turnover in that case. And so in wins, the Saints are closer to that, 3.4. Now, remember, that also includes the pick 6. So we have to take the pick 6 away. If we do that, then it's 3.08. Okay, still better than a field goal per opportunity. But here's the thing. In every single case in which the New Orleans Saints have scored off of a turnover this season, they have won that game. All 44 points that the Saints have scored off of turnovers in this season have happened in the 5 wins. 0 points off of turnovers off of 5 turnovers forced in their losses so far this year, including in every one of those losses. That is telling. That is telling for me that it's a formula for success for your team, but B, the inability to be able to do it and how much your defense defines your ability to win games. Because what we're seeing is that the Saints offense, when the defense isn't forcing turnovers and not giving them the extra opportunities, they're not winning games. And in games in which the defense is giving them opportunities, but the offense can't capitalize on it, they are not winning games. But when the defense gives them those opportunities and they capitalize on those opportunities, even at a below average per turnover, per opportunity base, they win games. This is huge for me. Like, this is a big time telling thing for me, that you have to be able to get this offense clicking and that the defense has to give this offense extra opportunities if you want to win games. That's not a great situation to be in. You should be able to still be in and win games without getting those extra opportunities. You should still be able to put points on the board without being given those opportunities. But then when you're not able to put points on the board consistently, despite being given those opportunities, that's cause for concern as well. So for me, that's pretty big. So yes, the Saints defense can keep them in conversation this year, especially with the division, all that stuff. But I'm casting all that aside. The Saints defense is good enough to give them an opportunity. Is the offense good enough to make good on that opportunity? That's where the doubt comes in. Let's take a look, though, at where the New Orleans Saints defense can get better, because while they do excel against the pass, there are some other things that are happening over on the defensive side that could be costing them games. Let's break it down. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Jase Medical. We spend a lot of time talking together, you and I, so let's get personal for just a second. Whether you're on extended travel, maybe you're bracing for a big or major weather event or something like that, or there's yet another supply shortage issue that you're dealing with, our friends over at Jase Medical have something that are going to help you out big time. There are lots of fantastic reviews about Jase Medical, all that, including one that says here, I'm thankful for this service. Supply issues have put them in a situation where they have to cut pills in half just to have their medication. Ordered most of the daily meds through Jase Medical. Ordered the antibiotic kit as well, the Jase case, which is awesome. Feel very safe and secure now. Prices lower than local pharmacies and highly recommended to everyone. So please take a moment to go and check this out and see if maybe you can find some peace of mind for you and your family by finding those daily meds and see if they end up having that supply for you and that it's offered for you. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off of your purchase at Jase Medical, JASE medical.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Big thank you again to all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget about that Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream that you can find on YouTube. Just search Locked On Sports Today. Subscribe today to be a part of history. All right, so as we take a look at where the New Orleans Saints defense can improve, there are still some things in the passing game to improve. The secondary, the coverage has done really well, but the pass rush is lacking. And if the New Orleans Saints can fix their pass rush problem, then all of a sudden we're really talking about the New Orleans Saints defense being able to lead the way over the course of these last 7 games, potentially save the season for this team. Here's where they sit right now, and here's how they can improve. 18 sacks so far on the season. Only 4 teams have less. That includes the Chicago Bears, the New York Giants, the Carolina Panthers, and the Denver Broncos. 2 teams are tied with the Saints at 18, the New England Patriots, as well as the Jacksonville Jaguars. Not great company when it comes to pass rush, right? So that's a big thing where they have to be able to get to the quarterback and finish plays at the quarterback. Lots of sacks avoided for this New Orleans Saints team. In fact, I have that number as well. The Saints have had, I think it's 18 sacks avoided on them so far, which is up near the top of the NFL when it comes to that conversation. Yeah, so they're pretty high up on that as well. So there's only 7 teams that have less sacks avoided than the New Orleans Saints defense. So finishing plays when they get to the quarterback continues to be a major issue, but is one of those things where if they can fix that, and if they get that to middle of the pack in the NFL, then all of a sudden they're finishing more sacks and they're trending in the right direction. And that could end up having a big impact. I don't know if this New Orleans Saints team with 7 games left finds a way to get from 18 sacks to over 40 sacks on the season. It would be the first time since 2017 in which the Saints do not finish a season with 40 sacks over the course of 16 games, let alone a 17-game season. So that's a big one to watch in terms of trends heading down towards the end of the season. Now, the Saints did just bring in Jason Pierre-Paul as somebody to come and maybe help out a little bit as a supplemental pass rusher, as a rotational guy. I don't know how much of an impact he ends up having, or if he even sticks on the roster beyond when Isaiah Foskey comes back. But hey, going out there and finding a veteran that can contribute, I get it. Find something. Like, this is the thing, is like, what I love about the New Orleans Saints over on the defensive side is that they'll keep swinging. They'll sign players like Janoris Jenkins late in the season a few years ago, continuing to work on the linebacker core late in the season last year, continuing to work on the pass rush late in the season this year. Like, these are things that the New Orleans Saints do on the the defensive side that you kind of wish that they'd find a way to do over on the offensive side. And beyond the struggles that they've had so far with finishing plays when they get to the quarterback, one of the other things that's pretty big to me is the amount of time they allow for quarterbacks. Now, what we know about the New Orleans Saints is that they do not allow, or rather do not rely on speed when it comes to getting after quarterbacks. They like to out-effort offensive lines. They have big defensive linemen. They rotate a lot so that you get to a situation to where your guys are fresh. The offensive line's been on the field for 60 plays. Your defensive line's sitting around like 40, 50 at the most, all of those. But it hasn't turned out to help them as much as you might expect it to. Really looking at the mold of these pass rushers that the Saints utilize. It's not to say that guys like Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson aren't valuable. Of course they are. But having another speed rusher, right, getting some speed on that defensive line ends up complementing what they can do. Let's look at this here. The New Orleans Saints right now surrender the most time to throw in the NFL. So quarterbacks have the most time to get the ball out up against the New Orleans Saints pass rush. Along with the Lions, actually. The Lions and the Saints are tied in that metric. On the other hand, and not on the other hand, but as an additional part of that, the Saints also take the longest to generate pressure, 2.8 seconds to generate pressure for the New Orleans Saints. That's ahead of the second lowest team in that metric, or second longest team in that metric, which is the Atlanta Falcons at 2.77. So that's an eternity for a good NFL quarterback. Not an outstanding quarterback, not an elite quarterback. That's an eternity for a good NFL quarterback. And so you have to imagine that as the New Orleans Saints have continued to invest later on in seasons and things like that, that maybe getting an earlier jump and rethinking the mold of pass rushers could go a long way for them and would help further that relationship between rush and coverage. Any other things that help to make that a little bit evident, just to kind of put a bow on the pressure conversation? Saints are 10th lowest in the NFL in terms of pressure total. They're 5th lowest in the NFL in terms of pressure percentage, so the number of times that they rush and get pressure. And then they are 6th lowest in the NFL right now when it comes to pressure converting into sacks. So that's a big piece for them. And only 7 teams in the NFL have had more sacks avoided against their pass rush than the New Orleans Saints. That's a pretty sizable issue if you're the New Orleans Saints. So I think that maybe introducing a little bit more speed and simulating a little bit more pressure. The Saints don't blitz a lot. Maybe it's time that they start blitzing a little bit towards the end of the season. That helped them a lot at the end of last season as well. If the Saints can do that and start to generate more reliable pressure, particularly quickly, then they could end up really benefiting themselves in this conversation. Therefore, the rest of the defense, therefore the team, as the season wraps up. And really, like, here's the other thing about like the Jason Pierre-Paul signing and then potentially getting Isaiah Foskey back at some point, and then like hoping to get a guy like Peyton Turner back, which we anticipate might be possible later on in the season, weeks like 13, 14, 15, somewhere around there, is that like the Saints pass rush is not going to improve because 1 player, 2 player, 3 players get added into the mix. The Saints pass rush has to improve because the pass rush plan improves. So maybe guys like Jason Pierre-Paul, Isaiah Foskey, and then eventually Peyton Turner give you the ingredients, right? The talent, the type of players, whatever, that you need to reshape that pass rush plan. But that's what they should be seen as. They should be seen as ingredients to improving the pass rush, as opposed to the additions that result in an improved pass rush. I hope that makes sense. But I think that that's kind of what you're looking at here. But if the Saints can do that, then all of a sudden, like, the defense continues to set the offense up in a bunch of ways for them to be able to win games. It's just that the offense has to be able to capitalize when given those opportunities. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're going to take a look at the rookie class and the roster as a whole and kind of reevaluate, not really reevaluate, but kind of review first half of the season in the bye week. What's working, what's not working, where can the Saints improve, how can they improve it? We'll take a look at the rookies and review sort of their impact as well, and really get an idea of like which of these rookies are long-term guys, which of these rookies still have a lot to show. We're going to get into all of that in Friday's episode as we close out the week here on Locked On Saints. I appreciate you as always, all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Living out of families doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.